my mind behind it, and I lost my self-respect. That wasn't who I really was. I should have known better. I was the only one who had a wife back home. But I was cheating on Lydia before and after we were married. Where I grew up, everybody had girlfriends on the side. My grandfather was a huge womanizer. It must have been in my DNA. But I know Lydia never realized the extent of the decadence on the road. Another reason I was never satisfied sexually with Lydia was because of the sexual education I had enjoyed on the road. I wasn't the most knowledgeable guy when it came to sex. Then we went on the road and I started meeting worldly women who knew what they were doing. When we finally toured Europe, it was a sexual smorgasbord. I was fucking a French woman one night, a German the next, an Italian girl the next week, then a Swede after her. So when I came home, sex with Lydia wasn't good enough. How could she compare? I might go months without seeing Lydia. I'd start to miss her, and I did love her very much, so I'd bring her out on the road if we had a couple of days off. She'd come out and we'd have a ball, but she would never know anything about my other exploits. What happens on the road stays on the road. The other guys and the crew always covered my ass. After 3 days I'd tell her that we had some heavy gigs coming up and she should go home, and she was fine with that. Later on, when we started doing cooler places like Europe and Tokyo, she wanted to come out more, and I was cool with that because I wasn't as sex-obsessed as Jean. If I got sex, great, but it wasn't priority number one. The music always had priority. Ace and Paul felt that way too. Gene could have all he wanted after the show, but nothing was going to get in the way of the music. Once the show was over, the party would resume. Throughout all that insanity and depravity, somehow I held onto my religion. Every night on the road, before I would go to sleep, I prayed. Amid all that dirt and decadence, I always had that little moment before I closed my eyes. My religion was really important to me because I knew the foundation of it was good, the words were good, the rules were good. I needed that grip on things because the other 3 guys were crazy, the road manager was crazy, our manager was crazy, the record company owner was crazy. Who could I talk to about my real feelings and my spirituality? None of them were religious at all. I couldn't sit down with any of them and say, I think I'm a little out of control with the booze and the drugs and the chicks. Can you help me with this? There was no place to fill that yearning during the day, so I would wait until I was in bed and the lights were out. Even if I had 2 or 3 chicks next to me. In bed, I would do an act of contrition. But I still felt bad. So I'd call my mother. It might be 2 a.m. back in Brooklyn, but she answered. Ma, it's me. I'm not doing so good. I'm doing bad things, sleeping with a lot of women, I'd say. Are you praying to God? She'd ask. Yeah, but I don't know if it's working, I'd say. Try to be a good boy, Georgie, she'd plead. I felt like I was falling into a snake pit. But just hearing her voice would ground me and make me feel normal again. I was Georgie Criscuola again, at least for a little while. Studios at the record plant in New York, arguing over something stupid, as we often did, when out of nowhere Bob Ezrin, our producer, came running into the room. He was wearing a t-shirt that read "Time is money" and he had a crazed look in his eyes. Plus he was carrying a metal fire extinguisher. "You cocksuckers are going to learn what this means," he said, referring to the slogan on his shirt. "You are not going to waste the fucking time that we're paying for arguing over what you're going to eat or when you're going to get some pussy or whatever the fuck your problems are, because you can't even tune your own instruments. Instruments. I'm going to show you the value of time." He proceeded to start spraying the contents of that fire extinguisher all over the studio floor, all over the wall, all over our instruments, all over our amps, even all over us. We were shocked and ran out of the studio and into the console room as we watched him maniacally spray down the room. Then he marched back into the console room and sat behind the big board, which had his name engraved on a metal plate that was attached to it. He was that powerful a producer. "Now who's wasting money and time?" he asked. Ezrin seemed out of his mind. Maybe the huge mound of cocaine piled up like a small mountain on the board had something to do with this outburst. "How long is it going to take us to get back into the studio?" Gene asked. "I don't really care," Ezrin answered. That was the first day of working with the boy. Wondered Bob Ezrin. And it wasn't even the worst one. Coming off our breakthrough Alive album, we finally decided to listen to the people who kept telling us that our music should be more sophisticated, more like The Who and Led Zeppelin. I always thought that our strength was in our rawness and balls, to the wall energy. Kiss was always a great three-chord jerk off band, the best three-chord band in history. I could understand the desire for change. I was getting pretty bored playing the same boom, ba boom, boom, ba, boom, ba boom, boom, ba beat song after song. But as Gene loved to say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yet now we were about to fix it after we had achieved our first major success. We were all excited about working with Bob Ezrin, though. He had produced all the classic Alice Cooper albums and had done a groundbreaking record with Lou Reed. He was, from all accounts, a musical genius. He was also a major coke addict at the time. I had never seen that much coke in one place. I'm not talking about grams, it was more like bags full of blow that would be laid out in pyramids on the mixing board. It was interesting that Gene and Paul didn't say a word about Bob's drug problem. They were both majorly anti-drug, and if Ace or I would get fucked up on drugs, all hell would break loose. In Gene's memoir, he claims that when he saw all that coke on the console, he thought it was sweet and low and put it in his coffee, but he didn't drink it. He must have thought the razor blade was a stirrer and the mirror was to admire himself in. Paul immediately had his nose up Ezrin's ass, and before we knew it Bob was at Paul's house writing songs with him. The songs themselves were actually quite great, songs like God of Thunder and Flaming Youth. What I didn't like was that they'd come into the studio and tell me how to play the song. It wasn't a suggestion. And it wasn't a collaboration, it was "this is the way you do it." Of course I rebelled. Then Ezrin would pour out a mound of coke and use it to reward me for doing it his way. So if the coke was to be our common ground, I wanted to get up on his level and do the same amount as he did, but it was impossible. Ezrin had a nose like an aardvark and I could never keep up no matter how hard I tried. Ezrin really took us all to school. One time he was listening to us play and walked into the studio from the console room. "What the fuck are you doing?" he screamed at Gene. "I'm playing," Gene said. "You're not even in fucking tune. Don't you know how to tune your guitar?" He proceeded to show Gene how to perfectly tune the bass. Gene was a large, intimidating man, but I saw Bob ream him out and carve him a new asshole. And Gene just took it. Bob did the same thing with me. I was trying to play a song and Bob blew up. "You can't play this beat," he screamed. "Give me the fucking sticks." He sat down behind my drums and played the beat, and once he showed me and I understood the theory of it, it wasn't hard. make me look like a jerk to teach it to me. We all learned an enormous amount from him. It was like being in a musical summer camp. He brought a blackboard in and he wore a little cap and he had a whistle around his neck that he would blow when we